Alright, so let's try this. This is something I'm going to call the Fidgetcast. I need to do something while I talk, and therefore I'm going to play games, and I'm going to give you something to watch while you listen to me talk. I'm going to talk about 3 things today. 3 things I hate. I hate dieting, I hate my ADD, and I hate the Prosperity Gospel and the Prosperity-Lite Gospel. I'll get into the semantics around those. First and foremost, I really like chicken, and I really hate losing weight. I'm not like super fat. I'm probably fine, but I am on the upper end of the acceptable scale, and I could really stand to use a few pounds. So I've been trying to get more into salads. Salads are good, but not nearly as wonderful as fried chicken like they give away. I say give away. That I usually get at Hannaford. I work right about across the road, and they have a chicken, like a hot wing bar, and they have mozzarella sticks, and they have potato slices, and it's all wonderful, and I have to give that up for a while because I don't want to be a walrus. I think that's a commendable goal, and I'm working towards it. So my goal, like, I'm sitting around like 185 right now. My goal is somewhere in the 150s. So around 40 pounds or so would be great. I hate dieting though. Second thing, I hate my ADD. And I'm going to be something a little more serious because genuinely it's bothering me. I've noticed as I've gotten older, I'm 31 now. I've noticed as I've gotten older, I absolutely need input at any given point. I can't live without input, and it's truly starting to bother me. It's starting to get to a point where I can't control it. I can't even read a book anymore without getting halfway through a page, reading a certain word, and that just sets off a string, an absolute string of tangents in my head, and my eyes are still reading. I'll get 2 pages ahead and realize I haven't read anything, which for someone who, number 1, is in college, number 2, really loves to study the Bible, this is a problem. So I've been depending a lot on playing games and listening to stuff, listening to lectures, listening to podcasts. It's actually been really helpful because I have been learning that way. But this is something I need to get under control. I grew up in an age where it was not necessarily acceptable. It wasn't. There's kind of a stigma attached to being ADD, and that either you were a complete spaz without medication, or you would turn into a zombie, and people would judge you either way. And there's still a little bit of that lingering in the back of my head, I think. So I'm trying to find ways to not just in my everyday life reduce the amount of input that I need. I was using 3 monitors at work. I've moved that back down to 2 to try to get to the point where I don't need all the input. I'm addicted to input, and I'm starting to realize it wasn't nearly this bad when I was a kid. I used to read lots of books when I was a kid. I was a huge fan of the Redwall series. I mean, not like insubstantial books, like, you know, I read, I want to say I read the Silmarillion. I did not read the Silmarillion. I read one part of the Silmarillion for a book report. But I love to read, and I can barely do that anymore unless it's something that's super gripping and I'm far away from any sort of other input. Otherwise, it's a complete lost cause. I'm just done with it. I'm absolutely done with it. I can't really live like this anymore. And you know, I've talked to my wife about this, and like to the point of tears. Like, it's that frustrating to me to want to learn, to want to read, to want to expand my mind, and yet my stupid brain consistently defaults to video games. Now, I realized that when I was I used to be very involved in sports, and once I stopped being involved in sports around age 16 or so, that's when this really started to kick in. And I started doing worse in school. I realized that it was just because I was training my body to only accept input that I wanted it to, like only accept mass amounts of input, and to be addicted to it at a certain level. And I'm trying to work my way out of it. As you can see, it's not going terribly well. I think I'm probably going to go the medication route eventually. It's frustrating. It's something I don't want to deal with for the rest of my life. And I don't think that there should be any stipulation about that. There shouldn't be any stigma attached to that. So, moving on to my next subject. I know that if you follow me on Facebook, I talk a lot of crap about the prosperity gospel, and I believe rightfully so. I believe it is a prostitution of false gospel, as the band, wow, I can't talk today. The band Beautiful Eulogy would call it. And as someone who is very passionate about getting the gospel correct, I feel like so many times we give prosperity gospel and the Prosperity-Lite gospel a pass. Now, let me kind of divide these into two different categories. You have your hard prosperity gospel preachers. You have your Kenneth Copelands. You have your Creflo Dollars. You have your well, I was going to say Todd White, but he's more soft prosperity. These ones that consistently talk about money almost entire. Benny Hinn. Benny Hinn's another hard prosperity teacher. But then we've gotten to the point where we're starting to get wise to that, which is good. It's good that we're wise to that, and it's not quite the epidemic it was in the 80s, but it's still very much alive and kicking. However, now we have to contend with Prosperity-Lite teachers. You have your T.D. Jakes. You have Joel Osteen is kind of straddles the line between the two. And these teachers like Stephen Furtick that focus so hard on making the gospel entirely about you. They take the entire Bible and they kind of insert you into it. And I am convinced that the best way to go about to read the Bible is to realize it's not about us. It is about God. It's about what he's done. It's about what he's accomplished. It's about his plan for salvation. And the entire thing is about him. A hard truth that you need to learn. You are not David, no matter how many times Stephen Furtick and his buddies would like to tell you. It's not about you. If anything, you are the cowering Israelites in the corner. Jesus is David. If you read, and when Jesus said to the Pharisees, "Hey, Moses spoke of me," I don't think he was kidding. I don't think that we should insert ourselves. So you have this Prosperity-Lite gospel that kind of it's a substitution, where instead of talking about prosperity, it's talking about what you can do, what you are capable of. And I've read through a lot of the Bible. I'm going to be completely honest with you. I'm still working through the Old Testament for the first time in my entire life. I just finished the New Testament late last year. And honestly, that's more due to what I believe was my own conversion a couple years ago after years of living with a Christian label. That's a whole other story. I'll probably get into it some other time. But everything I find, everything I read, all I can find is that Jesus is absolutely right. It all points to him. It points to our need for salvation and what God's doing about it. So the entire Old Testament just shows this beautiful need, this beautiful covenant and the promises of God pointing towards Jesus. And then the New Testament shows what happens after that, after those are fulfilled. And rather than the Bible shows our need for a Savior, our consistent need for the Spirit of God to work in us if we're going to do anything in this life. And what we end up with is, in a lot of charismatic circles especially, is you kind of get this, you can do anything, because the Spirit of God, he's spoken of more as the force. God is something you harness. And this is the common theme between both hard prosperity and soft prosperity teachers. They see God as something to harness, as someone to use. They see the person of the Holy Spirit as a kind of force to manipulate for either good things, for either getting a promotion or getting money, getting, or as the aforementioned dieting, some kind of, it basically ends up being a self-help gospel. And that's just not right. Like, I cannot reconcile the biblical account to that. I cannot do it. And so many people, because it doesn't say anything specifically, like, it doesn't say anything overtly offensive. And so because it's not, we kind of look at Kenneth Copeland and Creflo Dollar, and we're like, oh, whoa, those guys are definitely not speaking the gospel. But then you have these people that end up dressing up a self-help gospel, which isn't quite as overt. And it's just as devastating if you truly follow it. And that's something that I think that we as Christians need to be a lot more discerning about. I want you to really, when you're listening to a pastor, I want you to think about, is this whole thing pointing to me, of what I can do? Is this whole sermon about me, or does it point to the God that I am made to glorify? I want you to truly think about that. I want you to think about it hard. I want you to think about it a long time. I want you to not swallow any sort of preaching, whether you feel like it's perfectly fine or not. Don't swallow any part of it non-critically. Look at it, compare it. When it says in the New Testament, Paul congratulated the Bereans, who basically they didn't just take it at face value. They didn't take what he was saying at face value. They looked in the scriptures to see if it was true, and at that point, that would have been the Old Testament. That would have been the Old Testament they were looking at and just going like, okay, does this match up with this? And they searched it out. And we need to be just as careful today, rather than just giving someone a free pass because of their name. We need to look at these things critically. And again, that's something I'm very passionate about. It's something that I feel is necessary, and there's been a very sad dumbing down and kind of laissez-faire attitude amongst Christians these days. And we can't have that anymore. If we're going to make a difference in this world, or we are going to have to apply scriptural concepts of holiness, of the glory of God, of God's character, rather than some milquetoast kind of, well, I'm just going to do my thing over here. It doesn't work. That's not the kind of gospel that changes lives. It never will change lives. Until we realize the true extent of the gospel that is so insulting. If the gospel does not scrape against you, at some point, I truly don't believe you get it. Because it's saying that we are completely and utterly helpless if not for the Spirit of God. Completely and utterly. There's no self-help. There's nothing. We are nothing without the presence of God in our lives. And that's really all I had to say for today. I'm trying to keep this pretty short. My stopwatch is telling me that it's about a little under 14 minutes right now. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll try to do it again. I don't know. This might be the only thing. It was fun to do for them, though. So have a good night, and God bless, I guess. Is that what you say at the end of these things? Anyhow, have a good one.